When we embrace who we are in light of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, then we are not taking that gift of who Jesus is in vain. Really, at the heart of the David and Goliath story is David claiming his identity, who he is, and who God is. And he overcomes Goliath after some significant trash talk. That is ancient Hebrew trash talk. Well, what a perfect set of readings for Disney Sunday, right? Disney movies always have a big scary villain, right? Of some kind or another. And we have that in the giant Goliath of Gath by name, right? We've got that great story there. And then sometimes Disney stories have really scary scenes where nature itself is really scary. And did anyone else sort of picture Ursula in her scary form from Little Mermaid as we were hearing that story from the gospel? Yeah, there's the story about how even the elements, the sea and the wind, Jesus can calm. But I actually think maybe the Disney movie that speaks the most to these readings and this season in which we find ourselves in the church and the different stories we're going to hear over the summer and into the fall, but also where we find ourselves as people, as a society, a nation, a planet, might actually be Inside Out 2. Now, who here has already seen Inside Out 2? Yay! You and me, Liam. Okay, who here has seen Inside Out 1? Okay. If you haven't seen Inside Out 1, your homework is to go on Disney Plus and see Inside Out 1, and then go see Inside Out 2. I will not give away the storyline. I won't give away the storyline. But from Inside Out 1, we know that the story is really about the emotional landscape of a little girl. And in Inside Out 2, she's turned 13. And at one point, everything sort of gets deconstructed in the emotional landscape HQ. And new emotions are introduced, like anxiety and embarrassment. And it gets really messy. And the movie takes place over about a week of Riley's life. And I won't give away how it all wraps up, but it shouldn't surprise you, because this is Disney, that there's a major turning point that changes everything when Riley remembers who she is. She remembers her truest identity. And that's one of the reasons why I'm grateful on this Disney Sunday we get to hear the song of a Disney princess, because of the different ways that our self-understanding and identity play out in those Disney princess songs so powerfully. Who we are and who we are in God is a major theme we'll hear out throughout the season after Pentecost. And today is no different. Really, at the heart of the David and Goliath story is David claiming his identity, who he is, and who God is. Because short of the very deadly, precise weapon that was his sling, and the sling in the ancient world in the hands of a well-trained shepherd was a very lethal weapon, really. He really goes into battle with his faith, his self-knowledge, his claiming who he is. I am the one who has done hand-to-hand combat with lions and bears. And God, who helped me overcome those wild beasts, will help me overcome this Philistine. He remembers who he is and who God is. There's also an amazing scene. I'm sure it sort of piqued your curiosity, certainly enlivened your imagination, when David finally convinces Saul to let him go into battle on behalf of the children of Israel, and Saul says, well, fine, then take my armor. And the armor doesn't fit. A more appropriate translation is that armor just didn't fit. He couldn't even walk in that armor. That was not David's identity. Saul's armor belongs to Saul. And was frankly the old way of doing things. It was not going to work for David. You remember a few weeks ago we talked about how these passages from 1 Samuel are really about the change that happened between the period of the judges into the monarchy. And they were moving away from something familiar into something unfamiliar, and they were in that in-between space. And this whole series into 1 and 2 Samuel is going to be trying to figure out, what does kingship even mean? So here we are, David armed with his 5 stones from the wadi and his sling, and he overcomes Goliath after some significant trash talk. That is ancient Hebrew trash talk. We heard translated very politely, sort of politely, in our text. David remembers who he is, who God is, and who he is in God. Similarly, our friends, the disciples, on that boat after that very long day, go get some rest, Jesus. Jesus is napping. And we should not be too hard on those fishermen for their fear. They were fishermen. They knew when to be afraid on the water. You may remember, I would officially call Hurricane Sunday last August, when we didn't know if we were getting a hurricane or a tropical storm. But when did we decide to go back online? Does anyone remember that week when we decided to go back online? Yes, Liam? Yeah, you remember? Yeah, me too. It was when the Navy sent the fleet out to sea, right? I mean, I got to tell you, the Navy knows a lot more than I do about a tropical storm and hurricanes. And if the Navy thinks they need to move those ships out to sea, I'm going to trust that they may know more than I do, right? They knew how to handle that oncoming storm. So I trust that these fishermen knew it was right to be afraid. Matthew, the tax collector, was probably just confused and wondering what in the world he was doing in a boat anyway, right? They knew it was time to be afraid. The place where their faith really wobbles, though, is what they say to Jesus. It's not that they were afraid of the storm, it's they're not trusting Jesus in that moment. Don't you care that we are perishing? They ask him. But did you notice also, speaking of identity, what they call Jesus in this passage? It's okay to look. What do they call Jesus in this passage? Teacher. Right, they call him teacher. They're not referring to him as Lord. Others in this gospel so far have called him all kinds of things, referring to his divinity. Well, it's often someone, in the clutches of a demon. Other people are identifying who he is. They're still calling him rabbi. Now, rabbi is a title of great respect, but it is not all that Jesus is. And they are starting to realize who Jesus is, the one who calms even the wind and the sea. And then we hear, not that they were in great awe. That is a really lame translation. Thank you, NRSV. What the Greek actually says is they feared a great fear. After the storm has calmed and they realize who is in the boat with them, then they fear a great fear. Because they rightly are starting to get a glimpse that it is actually the one who calms and created the sea who is in the boat with them. This realization of who Jesus is happens very gradually in Mark's gospel. It is not John's gospel where you get a few verses into the first chapter of John's gospel and Jesus is already the word that is eternal, right? Mark is very different. For as quickly as Mark moves in the narrative, this revelation of who Jesus is comes, especially to the disciples, very slowly. But what's fun, and I encourage you, if you've not done so already, go ahead and read the entirety of Mark's gospel. You actually can do it in a sitting. Get some lemonade, some tea, sit in the shade this afternoon, and read Mark's gospel. And you'll see there's a neat thing that happens. This is actually one bookmark within Mark's gospel of Jesus controlling the elements. The other bookmark, anyone want to guess the story that's the other bookmark? It's just exquisite. Choir, you heard this at 8 o'clock. You're not allowed to answer. It's Jesus walking on the water. And in between, he keeps doing these amazing things, teaching amazing things. They're figuring out who Jesus is. In our alternate reading today, which is in your bulletin, Paul is writing to the church in Corinth again, this church that he's had this big wrestling relationship with. It has not been an easy relationship. And he's urging them not to receive the grace of Christ in vain, that now is the time to embrace the gift of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, and to open their hearts to this grace. When we embrace who we are, and who we are in light of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus, then we are not taking that gift of who Jesus is in vain. I also love that Paul, the punchline on that reading today is about opening their hearts. Because, just to play with some more fun language, does anyone remember, because I know I've mentioned this before, what the Old English root of believe is? It's be-love. It's about our hearts. The root of believe is not about our brains, although they are important, not about our intellect, although that is a gift from God. It is about our hearts and where we place our hearts. We find ourselves in a world that, like the disciples, can feel like a mighty storm. The disciples are traveling with Jesus between foreign and unknown territory and familiar territory, the Jewish world and the Gentile world, when this storm hits. They are constantly being surprised. The world is not what they thought it was. Jesus maybe isn't who they thought he was. We aren't that different. Every time we open up our social media feed and scroll through the news, or we open up our favorite subscription on our phones, or go out and get the paper off the front porch and read the news, it seems like a world that is mystifying, perhaps frightening, certainly not calm seas. It's a world where we are also betwixt and between, in between what has been familiar and a place we don't quite know. Whether that's who we are individually and a journey we're on personally, certainly we're finding our way as the church, but so are we as a society. So are we as a nation. So are we as a planet, trying to live on this planet together. Not just for our sake, but for the sake of our children. It's a world that can feel an awful lot like that boat in the storm. But we do have Jesus with us in that boat. And although it might be shocking to realize that it is Almighty God who loves us this much, placing our trust in God and remembering who we are and who we are in God. Indeed, we too will find the storm calm and find our way.